Thanks very much, Martin. It's nice to be in a positive position with the tourism industry after a few hard years. I'm sure everyone will agree, and that Christchurch video, I hadn't seen it before, so that's really exciting too, that everything's all coming together. In the interests of timing, we're already 20 minutes behind schedule. We all like to talk too much. We forgot to mention the red card system. Sorry for all the speakers in the room. We'll give you a red card flash when you're 5 minutes before finishing, so please take it in the well-intended manner it's meant. So our next speaker this afternoon is Richard Thomson. Richard joined Air New Zealand in early 2004, and he's held various roles with Air New Zealand, and he's currently the General Manager of the General Manager Group Network. Prior to joining Air New Zealand, Richard had 11 years' experience in the financial services industry, advising companies on mergers and acquisitions, debt and equity capital raisings, corporate taxation, and company valuations. Richard's favourite holiday destination is the Marlborough Sounds, and he's going to give us an update on all things new with Air New Zealand. Anyone who's going to Lux Experience or jumping on a plane in the next few days, he can't officially say anything, but maybe have a little chat and find out if you might be on the new plane.
Thanks for the kind introduction, Anna. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation to reflect on where we've been, but more importantly, where Air New Zealand's going over the next 3 to 5 years. Dylan, the last time I was at this conference, I think, was in Blenheim also, and it was a very different environment back then. I can't remember which year it was, 2011, 2012. But at that point, we're in the midst of dealing with all sorts of global uncertainty and volatility in the trading environment. So, I reiterate the points that have been well made today. It's great to sort of stand up here in an environment where the inbound tourism market has got so much momentum behind it, and we at Air New Zealand certainly feel very confident about the outlook. So I was going to talk to you briefly about two topics today. One is how we've reshaped our business over the last couple of years, and what that means for Air New Zealand going forward, and then talk briefly about the 787 and specifically what we think that means for tourism in New Zealand. Am I pressing the wrong button here? Here we go. Here we go. So to start with, reshaping our international network, I'll talk a wee bit domestically as well. But there are a few commercial realities that we've come to grips with over the last few years at the airline. And the first is that we face a business that suffers from pronounced seasonality. It was certainly an area of focus in the Tourism 2025 work, where we've still got plenty of air capacity in the shoulder and off-peak seasons that we could make greater value out of. The second point is that customers don't pay twice as much to go twice as far. They might pay twice as much to go twice as fast. We worked out a solution for that yet. But it has meant as an airline we've got out of what we call some of the sort of fringe markets that we're involved in. So most recently, 18 months, 2 years ago, we got out of the Hong Kong London market. So it costs you $2,000, but over $2,000 to fly to Hong Kong or the States or Japan, but $3,000 to get to Europe return. So we incur twice as many costs, but only get 50% more revenue for doing that. And point of mentioning this is that part of Air New Zealand's future is not to reinstitute services beyond our Pacific Rim gateways to points in Europe and other places for a simple reason that the economics don't work well for us. Economies of scale and traffic density are very important. So I know, Air New Zealand from time to time is accused of being an Auckland-centric airline, and in many respects that's not a mentality or a philosophy we have. It simply reflects the market realities of long-haul air travel. There's little or no long-haul international markets that I can think of where we fill the tube of the aeroplane in what we'd call a local market, the market between Auckland and Los Angeles, for instance. The tube every night, if you're on that Trans-Pacific flight, is filled with a spectrum of passengers coming from all sorts of different parts of the States, of New Zealand, of Australia, UK and Europe. And so it is important to get the load factors we need to make those flights viable, that we channel that over hubs in New Zealand, and certainly Auckland is our primary hub. And then lastly, I just wanted to reflect on the importance of airline partners in growing sustainable long-haul air links. When I joined the airline 10 years ago, the fuel price was a fraction of what it is today. The commercial risks of long-haul flying are much higher, and I spoke about that when I was last in front of this group in Blenheim. What it means is that it's quite foolhardy, I believe, these days to enter into these long-haul markets without being assured of the support of the very best airline partners at the other end of the route, to ensure that we leverage our respective network strengths at both ends of the market. And so that's very much part of our philosophy going forward. So those are some of the commercial market realities. There are some operational ones as well, and I'll touch on this a wee bit when we come back to the 787. But I think it's just important to point out that the further you fly, the more difficult it becomes commercially to make those flights sustainable. Unit costs go up dramatically on long distance flights, so you can see on that graph there, because we have to carry so much fuel for the first 10 or 11 hours of a flight to burn in the last 3 or 4 hours of the flight, that actually at a point, I always think it's around 11 or 12,000 kilometres, actually the economics or the cost of carrying the fuel all that way overwhelm the economics of the flight. At the very time you're payload constrained, so your ability to carry cargo drops away, and actually in its most acute form, your ability to carry cargo and some passengers drops away. So there is very definitely a limit to how far you want to fly a modern wide body before the two curves intersect and start tracking the opposite direction to what you'd want. So what that means for us as an airline is that we are focused very much going forward as a Pacific Rim carrier. So we're focusing on high growth markets where we can operate direct flights ourselves, subject to the graph that I put up before, and where we've got strong existing traffic flows. So that is very much the focus. There won't be any Hong Kong Munichs creeping into the network going forward. And as I said before, our aim is to leverage our partner strengths wherever we can on the network to ensure that those air routes are sustainable. And I'll go into that a wee bit more detail by region. Because often those not often, but in more recent times, some of those partnerships have actually extended beyond our traditional star partnerships. We've been prepared to reach out on a bilateral basis to partners that we think it makes sense to do business with in specific regions. There's no better example than that than the alliance we currently have with Cathay Pacific, which I think probably came out of left field for a few people, but they're a fantastic partner into North Asia for us. Between us, we operate 3 services to and from Hong Kong a day in the peak season. Air New Zealand operates one of those, and off-peak certainly no less than 2 services a day. And that relationship has certainly secured our position in the Hong Kong market, and gives us a great gateway to North Asia outside of our direct Shanghai services. The recently approved Singapore Airlines relationship is very exciting for us. One of the things we haven't seen on the Air New Zealand network for some years now is direct exposure to the Southeast Asian market, many of which are rapidly growing markets, but very hard to serve directly because the Southeast Asia, although it's big, it's quite a fragmented geography. And what we've got in Singapore Airlines is a partner with an unparalleled network into Southeast Asia, the subcontinent, and actually beyond into UK and Europe. So that's a very exciting development. Our first service, Air New Zealand, will operate back into Singapore's at the end of the first week of January, and we'll be operating our brand new 777-200. It's an older aircraft, 2006 aeroplane, but brand new interior. So we've got all those 8 aircraft coming out of the hangar over the next year or so with new interiors, which are very similar to the 777-300 and the 787. And then lastly, Virgin Australia. So we've had the alliance relationship with Virgin reapproved in the last 14 months, and they continue to be a very important partner for us in Australia, each leveraging our respective strengths on either side of the Tasman. Further afield into North America, again in Japan, again Air Canada and United, our key partners in North America, and United's got a absolutely fantastic or unparalleled network out of Los Angeles and San Francisco in particular, which has been great for the success and sustainability of those services. So this coming peak season, we're flying 10 times a week to San Francisco, which is the first time we've done that. 2 or 3 years ago, when I was speaking to you, we were still trying to get to a daily year-round service on San Francisco, so we've actually come a long way in the last couple of years. And then ANA, as you know, is our star partner in Japan. And actually, we had a relationship with Japan Airlines for many years, very successful, and they were a good partner, but it makes a lot more sense for us to be working with ANA in the Japan regional market, given that they're our natural star partner, and we've certainly seen our traffic volumes into and out of regional Japan grow quite significantly as a result of that development. So the 787, what does it mean for us? Well, the first myth I probably need to debunk is that it will fly a lot further. When Boeing sold us the aircraft 10 years ago, it was going to fly a lot further. It's a good aeroplane, it's got a good range. In the configuration we've got it in, it'll have a similar range to the 777-300. So what that means is that flying to places like India, Latin America, the east coast of the States, direct, is still very challenging operationally. So I wouldn't necessarily see the 787 as the key to unlocking direct flights into further afield places. There's only one aircraft in the world today that's genuinely equipped to do that, and that's the long-range version of the 777-200. Having said all that, it is an incredibly capable aeroplane. So it represents a huge advancement in passenger comfort and a great improvement in efficiency. So our first aeroplanes arrived. I joined the company about 3 months before we ordered this thing, and I've been essentially papering over the cracks for delays in its delivery for a long time, so I feel as I know this aeroplane well. It's finally arrived. It's got 302 seats on it, and it's in a configuration that's almost identical to the 777-300 in terms of cabins and product, and will be the same as the refitted 200s. And we've started flying that aircraft now. Closest I've got to it, as I saw it parked outside the hangar through an aircraft window, so I haven't seen it in the flesh yet, but it is flying at the moment between Auckland and Sydney, if you're lucky enough to get on it. In the weekend it's doing that twice a day. So that is pressed into service on Auckland-Perth next month. You can actually buy it in our published schedule from the middle of October. And then once we get 3 aircraft between now and the end of the year, we will have those aeroplanes flying all our Perth services, most of our Shanghai services, and most of our Tokyo services. By this time next year, all of the China and Tokyo services will be operated by the 300-seater. 20% more fuel efficient, so it makes the accountants happy. And it's a very comfortable aeroplane to be in. I don't know if anybody of you have had the chance to look at the mock-up, which we've got set up across from our office in Auckland. But enormous windows for those that remember the Friendship. It's a bit like a Friendship window, a bit more sophisticated looking. And new interior and very low cabin altitude. So you feel much more refreshed than you ordinarily would at the end of a long-haul flight. So its arrival in New Zealand does coincide with a period of significant growth for Air New Zealand. We've had the last 10 years, we've made an art form out of optimising and at times shrinking the long haul part of the business at Air New Zealand. We're now going into a phase of quite significant growth. We've had 20 aircraft in the wide body fleet for much of the last 10 years. That's rapidly growing to 25 aircraft over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. Each aircraft represents 5-6% growth in the business. So 2 significant points, a lot of growth coming down the pike, certainly by our standards, and secondly, a huge simplification of the fleet. So at the moment, we suffer not only from high costs of operating all sorts of different types of aeroplanes, but quite mixed product on the various aeroplanes. So now there's quite a stark difference these days between your business class experience on a 767, for instance, versus the new 777s and 787s. All that's going to be tidied up in the next couple of years. So our last 747 service operates to San Francisco on the 10th of September. I think there's still the odd seat left on it. Gets back here on the 12th of September, and that type's gone. The 767 retires from the fleet in late calendar 2016, so about 2 years from now, although we'll be reducing the fleet from 5 down to 2 or 3 aircraft this time next year. So some quite big changes in that space. And the 777-200, as I've mentioned before, is going through a major refit exercise at the moment. So each aircraft's being stripped bare and kitted out in the new 787 style product. But the growth is not limited to the long-haul network, so we're experiencing reasonably significant growth in the short-haul network. A couple of noteworthy points. We're replacing the 737 with A320s, sort of a point not lost on any of you, I'm sure. So that's a 130-seat aeroplane being replaced with a 170-seat aeroplane, and that process will be completed in September next year. So the last 737 flight is currently scheduled for the 7th of September next year. It will be an all A320 fleet at that point. And you would have read in the paper 2 or 3 weeks ago, we've now made a very significant commitment to replacing the 320 fleet on the Tasman. So the regional A320s, which we've had flying the Tasman since 2005, will get progressively replaced from 2017 onwards. So domestically, quite a big increase in seat count for the same number of aircraft, and then a simplification of the fleet, so the 737 gone. The other point worth mentioning is that we've committed to a lot more ATRs. So the ATR fleet is going to get to 20 plus over the next 2 or 3 years. For most of the last 10, it's been 11 aircraft. So it's doubled in size relative to its historic levels, and will be 60% more in seat capacity relative to last year. The beach fleet gets a little smaller, so it's halving, not quite halving in size, but going from 18 down to 12 aircraft. So what that means over the last 12 months is that we've experienced quite significant seat growth as an airline, and this is very pleasing to see. So North America, this northern winter coming up, we will be operating 15% more seats into and out of North America than we did 18 months ago. So it's been very significant growth out of a market that for much of the last 5 or 6 years has been stagnant or going backwards, so that's fantastic to see. Japan over the last, or Asia over the last 12 months has grown by 8%. But over this peak season, Japan is growing quite significantly. We're not flying to Kansai, but we are operating 10 times a week into Narita. So we've got 30% seat growth into Narita over the peak season year on year. And then Asia, more generally, over the next 12 months, is going to enjoy the benefits of the new Singapore service. So our Asian growth in FY15 is close to 30% rather than 8%. So very significant developments. And just to put that sort of in context, what does that mean? Our seats into Singapore with the Singapore Alliance is now 490,000 seats, which is a very significant increase on the 460 it's been traditionally. So not only have we replaced the capacity that was lost when JQ exited the market, we've grown it by a further 30,000 seats, and we're very optimistic about how well that alliance will form. So in summary, from Air New Zealand's perspective, we're very optimistic about the outlook. We think we've got sustainable long-haul services on most parts of our Pacific Rim network. The domestic business is growing strongly. We're making a $1.8 billion investment in new equipment over the next 2 or 3 years. So that is a statement of confidence. And that fleet implies 5 to 6% compounding annual growth over the next 3 to 5 years in the international business. And the domestic business has grown at 6% over the last year and a plan to grow at 5 to 6% over the next 12 months. So there's certainly plenty of seats going into the market going forward. So from a commercial perspective, the radical fleet simplification is going to be good for us. We're going to have a consistent product for the customers, particularly long haul, and big efficiency gains for us in the short haul business or across the board. The long haul business is back on a growth footing. I can remember sitting down post the tsunami in 2011, almost too scared to come out from behind the couch because the forward bookings were in such a state. But we've seen 20 months now, I think, of quite consistent, robust growth, helped by a relatively stable trading environment. Got significant domestic growth occurring, so the 170-seater replacing the 130-seater, and as I mentioned before, the ATRs almost doubling in size. We're back into Southeast Asia from the 6th of January, and the reason we think this will work better than the last time we're in Southeast Asia is the alliance we've got with Singapore Airlines. So when we last flew into Singapore, I think there were 4,000 seats a week on offer between New Zealand and Singapore. But the market between Auckland and Singapore was 150 odd passengers per day each way. So most of the traffic on that route, on that sector, was connecting to other parts of the Singapore Airlines network. And in the finest traditions of intense competition, they made sure that they didn't give us access to any of those services, or if they did, at relatively poor pricing. So what we've got in this relationship is it's a marriage in many respects. So they are as incentivised as we are to make our services perform well, and vice versa. So it's a very different setup to last time. And on that note, alliances with key airline partners are vital to our survival. So we'll continue to look for the very best airline partners in the various parts of the world that we operate into and out of. So with that, I'll open the floor up to questions if we've got time. I know you're trying to catch up time. 5 minutes. I'm very happy to answer questions if I can from the floor. Yes.
I'm from the Cape Coast, and I know that it's been a new thing for Cape Coast for Air New Zealand to land planes in our area,
Mm-hmm.
which is fantastic. Is that new aircraft going to be landing on
Which new one?
the B787?
No, not on the Kapiti Coast, unfortunately. The Q3, yeah.
What weren't they working on the big aircrafts?
Well, at the moment it's a Q300, and it's likely to remain. So it's a 50-seat aeroplane, and that's the way it'll stay for the time being. No, there'll be no international flights at this stage into the Kapiti Coast. Yes.
Will any of the new ATRs be equipped with RMP so they can get into Queenstown and Canberra?
That's the expectation. So the operational teams are working on RMP capability. So for those of you that are not familiar with that concept, it's a sort of advanced GPS system that allows the jets at the moment to get down. They can't instrument land in Queenstown, but it allows you to get down low enough to be able to land in inclement conditions. So we are working with ATR on securing RMP for that aeroplane, but realistically it's a 18 month to 2 year exercise.
Richard, I've got one quick question.
Yeah.
LA London,
Yep.
is that going to stay?
Yeah, it is. So, it's a good question, having just sort of preached about the fact that the future shape of the international network is Pacific Rim bound. We do, of course, have NZ1 and 2, which fly to and from London every day. It's not growing in size, so in fact it shrunk when we moved from the 747 to the 777. But there are still enough people that want to travel Air New Zealand all the way through to London on that flight to warrant keeping it on. And the sales teams in the UK and California in particular have actually done a remarkable job over the last 4 or 5 years at selling that flight more effectively into the California UK market. So we've actually competed quite effectively in the transatlantic market, notwithstanding the fact that we don't have any particular market presence at either end of that route. The sales teams, marketing teams have done a very good job on that. So no, the future of that route is secure, Martin.
Right.
Yes.
The range of the 787 doesn't seem to be on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
The range of the 787 on your maps seem to be able to reach India, but there's no talk of direct services, or it's going to hub through Singapore.
No, fair comment. The range, the circle on the chart I showed you was still air. Unfortunately, flying to India's into the westerly all the way, so the actual range chart skews a bit to the east. Direct flights to India are possible. We can do it. What's interesting, a couple of interesting observations. India's well served one stop at the moment, so flying directly into India involves overflying a bunch of Southeast Asian hubs, and if you want to call them hubs, overflying the east coast of Australia. So there are lots of ways people can compete with you in the India-New Zealand market on one stop, and they can price that very cheaply. So that's one issue. The second issue is, well, not so much an issue. Singapore serves multiple points in India every day, Singapore Airlines. So we've got 3 flights between Singapore and New Zealand every day that all arrive in Changi and then connect to flights to 7 or 8 different points in India. If you flew it direct, you of course only pick up the one city. So again, an airline like Singapore Airlines gives you far greater reach into India with greater regularity. So there's some challenges there in addition to the operational ones. The thing that I find curious about the Indian market, it is very big. There's clearly an opportunity there, but it's fascinating to note that until Air India started services between India and the east coast of Australia recently, Australia's not served directly to India. And there have been various attempts by Qantas and other airlines over the years to secure those routes. None of them have ended up being on a sustainable footing. So we wish Air India all the very best on that. We genuinely do, because it is a great link, one-stop link to India. But it's not easy. It's not an easy market to crack.
With the use of Alliance Airlines, for example, if you're a Corrie customer and you've got 2 bags, and then you get a transfer onto ANA, what happens then?
Yeah, good question. We have a baggage expert who's. It's very funny. Funny anecdote before we wind up. The IATA wanted airlines to standardise, or not standardise. They wanted to get a bit of consistency in some of these bags policies, and got all the airlines around the table. I think at a meeting in the US. And one of the officials at one point sat down and said, well, why don't you all just sit down, standardise your baggage policies and have a single one? Realised within a nanosecond of saying it that would all get us locked up for anti-competitive conduct and piped down. But it is very difficult because everybody's got, lots of airlines have got baggage policies that fit their particular markets. But when you join them all together in a global sense, often the gears graunch a bit. So there's no easy solution to that. And we do have people that are working on trying to streamline the baggage proposition all the time. IATA's changed the rules now so that the airline that you get on, or the ticket that you buy, at least the baggage policy has got to be consistent through the remainder of the journey, even if you're changing airlines. So they are making some improvements in that area, but practically difficult. Right, how are you going for time? All good? Thank you very much. Pleased to be here.